Schedule's brutal. And if they can't get quarterback right, for whatever reason they struggle on offense, tell me they couldn't possibly play their way out of the top 25? It could absolutely happen. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. Today's Monday, August 12th, and we hope that you've had a terrific weekend. Knowing that we're just 12 days away from the college football season getting underway, that means we'll be heading to Dublin. We'll have college game day. We'll have a bunch of games week 0 to look forward to, and there are some contenders I'll be playing in that week 0 game slot as well. I'm Greg McElroy. Along with me, as always, Mark Kubiak, Jack Foster, Jake Garcia. For those that are looking at us right now on the ESPN YouTube channel, I have totally gotten rid of the beard. Had a beard going for like a year. I've just finally looked in the mirror like, what are you doing? Not that it looked that terrible, just didn't look that good either. So got rid of the beard, going clean shaven this year. We'll see. I feel like I look a little younger, maybe. I feel older, but look maybe a touch younger. But I'll tell you what's also young is this AP poll. This AP poll came out just a couple minutes ago. We are taping it with fresh reaction. And there's some things to take away from this. Not saying that you need to put a ton of stock into it, but there is value to looking at the AP poll and assessing trends from previous years. That's all I'm saying. You don't have to sit there and treat this as if it's the 10 commandments. It's not. It's just a list of starting points based on offseason narratives. We'll tell you some they got right, some they got wrong, teams they're overvaluing, teams they're undervaluing, and why. And there's always a team or two that start in the top 10 and finish outside the top 25. Can we potentially identify those teams this year? We'll try. There's also some camp buzz. A lot of camp buzz right now. A lot of teams that were on the field this weekend for scrimmages, some fan days that were had. So we'll give you kind of a wrap around what went down on campuses the past few days and what's really happened here in the first half of camp. So let's not put it off. Let's go into the AP poll breakdown next on Always College Football. You don't have to acknowledge it as something that's really important. Every year, it's rinse and repeat. I listen to talking heads, self-included, either hyping up the AP poll or diminishing its value. I can already tell you right now, those that are associated with certain, places are going to diminish its value because it doesn't reflect well on some of their early matchups. Some that are favorably represented, some leagues that are favorably represented will basically elevate the importance of the preseason poll. No matter how you feel about it, it dates back to 1936. The preseason poll was launched in 1950. So the AP poll has mattered. It's a part of our historical significance. Here's the problem with it. It has not been super accurate when picking future national champions. Only 11 of the 74 previous preseason number 1 teams went on to win the national championship. And there hasn't been a single one that have done it since 2017. That was Alabama. They came in the season that year number 1. They won the national championship. That's the only one in the last handful of years that has actually done it. Only 3 AP preseason number 1 ranked teams in the last 25 years went on to win the national title. That was 1999 Florida State, 2004 USC, and 2017 Alabama. So there are 3 for the last 25 in being able to accurately pick the national champion. So bad news, I guess, if you're the Georgia Bulldogs. You are the AP preseason number 1 for the second straight year. They are the 6th team to top the preseason charts in consecutive seasons. And this is only the 3rd time that they've been the AP preseason number 1. Back in 2008, didn't really go their way. Came in with Matt Stafford, Noshawn Marino, a bunch of really talented guys. And they went on to have not a disappointing year, but not a year that was won with a championship at the end. And then last year, of course. So they're 0 for 2 in the 2 years that they've been the preseason number 1 when it comes to cashing it in for a championship. Ohio State's number 2. New Big Ten member Oregon is number 3. This is the third time that the Big Ten has had 2 teams in the top 3 of the AP preseason poll. Last year, Michigan was number 2 and Ohio State was number 3, right behind Georgia. And then the other season was back in 1961 when you had the Buckeyes, number 2, right behind Iowa. It was actually number 1, of course, a million years ago, 63 years ago, in fact. And I think Iowa might be running the same offense, or at least they were last year. Texas comes in as the number 4 team. It's the preseason AP poll. Highest ranking since it opened number 2 back in 2009. They finished 13-1 that year and almost won the national championship. They got all the way there, lost to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Michigan is ranked number 9 in the AP poll. That's the second lowest preseason rank for a defending national champion in the BCS or college football playoff era. So dating back to 1998. That is the second lowest. Auburn is the only defending national champ that was ranked lower. That was in 2011 where they were ranked 23rd. So, of course, they won it in 2010. Bam. Then Michigan won it last year. Michigan's 9. Auburn was 23, and Auburn at 23 was about right. Ole Miss is in at 6. That's their highest AP preseason poll since 1970. The SEC gets 9 teams in the poll. That's the most by a single conference in a preseason AP poll. The previous high was 8, held by the SEC in 3 different years, 2011, 2014, and 2015. A couple other outliers. Clemson comes in at 14. That's their lowest AP preseason rank since 2014 when they started the season 16th. So all things considered, a couple historical things there you need to just take into account. I actually think the list was pretty good. There's not a whole lot that I can point to and say, yeah, that was egregiously bad. There are some things, if you really look at it, I mean, our top 25 is kind of in unison in some ways with this top 25. Our top 5 are comparable. We have Ohio State 1, Georgia 2. We have, Texas and Oregon 3 and 4. We have Bama 5. I had Ole Miss at 7. I had Notre Dame at 6. Penn State was right there as well. Penn State, Notre Dame, Ole Miss, in any 3. That's kind of how we had it as well. We had Michigan outside the top 10. They have them at 9. It's really not that far off. We had Florida State at 12. They had them at 10. So if you really look kind of down the list, there's not that much that we disagree on. Where our lists start to disagree is actually in the 20s. Utah, they have Utah a little higher than I anticipated. They have a couple other teams in there as well that I don't at the moment have in my top 25, but we're splitting hairs, frankly. When we're in the top 20, top 10, top 5, that's a little bit different league. When you get down to 21 through, say, 35, is there that much really separating those teams? Not right now. They all have major question marks, and they all are kind of in prove-it mode. But one team that I felt like is ranked a lot higher than they probably should be is Iowa. And it's not because I don't think Iowa is going to finish the season ranked. It's not because I don't think Iowa is going to be a good football team. They're always a good football team, but the reason why people have them in the top 25 is because of their schedule. And I don't think we should look at, say, Liberty from last year. Liberty was undefeated. Liberty was what they were. They got to the New Year's Six. They got blasted. Why did Liberty get ranked where they got ranked? Because they had a really nice record. Iowa might have a really nice record, but will it reflect quality? Look at their schedule. Illinois State, Iowa State. Iowa State, I think, is going to be pretty good. So they get that win. That's a nice win, but it's at home. You have Troy at home, at Minnesota. They could theoretically start 3-1, and that would be somewhat of a disappointing start to the season. You get Ohio State on the road. That's a game that will probably be a real challenge. Washington comes to them. Big changes going on for Washington. At Michigan State, tricky game, but I think Iowa matches up well in that situation. Northwestern, Wisconsin, at UCLA. They're going to probably be in a good spot with those 3. At Maryland, tough game. Nebraska comes to them, tough game. We could be fast forwarding to the end of the year, and Iowa could be 10-2. Doesn't mean they're going to be great, though, because what will their best win be? That would be my challenge. And based on what I'm hearing, we'll go into Camp Buzz here in a little bit, it doesn't sound like the offense is making the progress that we had hoped for Iowa this offseason. So we're kind of banking on a team that is going to win the SEC West when the SEC West doesn't matter anymore. The SEC West doesn't exist anymore. And yes, their schedule's manageable, but are they really one of the 25 best teams in America? We'll find out. I wouldn't have them in. The AP does. One team that right now is not getting enough respect is Miami. Miami's at 19. And a lot of media members that are voting in this poll have probably been burned by Miami in the past. Probably have. I have probably been burned by Miami. I don't remember off the top of my head. Maybe it's this year. But Miami, when you look at their roster, I'm not, like we just talked about with Iowa, I'm not going to look at the schedule in this exercise. Not in this exercise. Schedules will matter when we know what these teams are. That's part of the problem, is we draw conclusions about teams based on where they're ranked in the preseason without acknowledging, oh yeah, you know what? That team's actually a whole heck of a lot better than we anticipated. So you deserve credit for that win over a team in week 2 that is now a top 10 team. Well, at the time they were unranked. It doesn't matter. We have to adjust and evaluate these teams as their story gets told. And Miami, coming into the season, has as good of a roster as 98% of the sport. So their roster from a talent standpoint across the board, yes, they're not in Ohio State territory. They're not in Georgia territory. I'm not putting them there. But there's not that many teams that are ranked, say, 3 through 15 that I would say, oh, yeah, their roster's way better than Miami's. Or, oh, yep, you know what? Penn State, their roster is way better than Miami's. I think Miami can actually hold up roster-wise against just about anybody ranked right now between like 6 and 18. And in some cases, I might actually prefer Miami because I think they're really good at quarterback. I think they're really good along the offensive line. I think they're really solid along the defensive line. I think they have game changers. I think they have difference makers. They have high-level, all-American candidates at multiple positions, whether it's right tackle with Francis Maui-Noah, whether it's defensive end with Ruben Bain, whether it's Cam Ward at quarterback, who accounted for 74% of his team's offense last year, whether it's the addition they made at running back that no one seems to be talking about, but we will when we get into Camp Buzz. I think when you look at Miami, they have many, many pieces that if they come together, they can beat anybody. Now, you're going to say, well, they didn't kneel on it against Georgia Tech. That's just low-hanging fruit. If you want to focus on that, fine. Ignore the positives, but when the Miami train leaves the station, do not try to jump on the bandwagon. We told you so right now. This team's going to be good, and I'm telling you, I think they're going to be a real problem for just about everybody in the sport. One team that currently is unranked, but will finish the season ranked. I'm going with the Auburn Tigers. I have them in my top 25 coming into the season. And the negatives on Auburn is, well, they didn't go out and get a game changer at quarterback. Well, Peyton Thorne, yes, that quarterback, he's won a New Year's Six bowl game in the past. He's been on really good football teams. One was at Michigan State when he was surrounded by a ridiculously talented supporting cast. And while people will say, well, he can't elevate those guys. Well, those other guys can elevate him, and he might end up having a heck of a year. I've heard pretty good things about what's gone down the plains the last few weeks with where he's at, where the receiver core is, the depth of that group, the weapons that they have, how they'll run the football, how the offensive line's coming together. And then you look at the schedule. Like I said, with Iowa a second ago, we're not going to assess the schedule. Auburn has a lot of big opportunities to make some noise. I would have Oklahoma in the top 16, 17, just like the AP does. Oklahoma comes to Auburn right after they play Tennessee at home in a very emotional welcome to the SEC game. Then you go on the road to Auburn. That's a massive opportunity for Auburn. You don't think they can get that win? They might be favored right now if the game was played tomorrow. So if you look at just the amount of opportunities that Auburn has to solidify a big-time program-defining win, they're all throughout their schedule, which is why I think Auburn at the end of the year will fast forward. They'll be 8-4, but they'll have a great win, maybe 2, and that will elevate their perception. So I think Auburn will finish the season in the top 25. I mean, goodness gracious, they have 2 points right now in the poll. 2. That's right behind Kentucky, who has 3, and above Colorado, who finished 4-8 last year. One team that is ranked right now correctly, but people are going to be mad about, is Michigan. Now, a lot of people are really up in arms. Well, Michigan's owned the Big Ten for the last 3 years, and Michigan has this, and Michigan has that, and their defense, their defensive line, their corner. I get all. They have good weapons. They have quality pieces along the defensive line. I think they're really good at all 3 levels defensively. I think they have solid offensive line as well, even though a couple of those guys, there are some question marks about that group and whether or not they'll be as good as they were the last 3 years. That's a question mark. But there's still questions at quarterback. Like, I don't know right now about whether or not Alex Orji is going to be capable of beating you through the air. I don't know that. Now, I'll change my tune week 2 against Texas if he goes out and starts lighting them up on incredible throws. If he does that, then sure, we will adjust Michigan where they need to be adjusted to. But as of this moment, today, August 12th, Michigan has major question marks at the biggest position, which is why I think they need to be in the top 12, not the top 4. So we'll evaluate them. But right now, they're appropriately ranked, even though I think a lot of Michigan fans are a little frustrated with how they're being evaluated heading into the season. Now, told you earlier, there's always one team that's in the top 10 in the preseason that probably isn't there. If you want to go back, 2023, that'd be number 6 USC. 2022, number 6 Texas A&M, number 10 Baylor. 2021, number 6 Texas A&M, number 7 Iowa State. 2018, number 4 Wisconsin, number 8 Miami, number 9 Auburn. 2017, number 3 Florida State, number 4 USC. 2016, number 10 Notre Dame. 2015, number 6 Auburn. That was the Jeremy Johnson year. 2014, number 4 Oklahoma, number 9 South Carolina. There's always a few teams every year that start the season in the top 10 that ultimately aren't playing as ranked teams at the end of November. A couple of teams that could very easily be this year. What if Alex Orji makes mistakes throwing the football? What if the offense sputters and if they have some turnover woes? What if that happens? And you look at Michigan's schedule, I mean, they could, in theory, be an 8-4 football team. Vegas, for the record, just so you know, ESPN bet 9.5 was the win total for Michigan. That's now moved down to 8.5. Schedule's brutal. And if they can't get quarterback right, for whatever reason they struggle on offense, tell me they couldn't possibly play their way out of the top 25? It could absolutely happen. What about Florida State? We look at Florida State, and we're banking a lot on DJ Uiagalelei. They're in at number 10. DJ Uiagalelei had a great year last year. Really nice year. Tons of yards per attempt, or air yards per attempt. I think his actual QBR was better than Jordan Travis's was last year. There's a lot to like about how DJ Uiagalelei has progressed, but the last time we saw him play in the ACC, it wasn't pretty. It was far from it. I think he's matured. I think he's grown. I think he's a better player today than he was 2 years ago at Clemson. But you're putting a lot on his shoulders. And there's really unproven weapons on the perimeter. There's big question marks at wide receiver. I think they'll be able to run the ball. I like their O-line. I like the tandem of backs that they have. I think they're really good at running back. They lost a key piece at tight end, but I still think they'll be good there as well. But receiver's a huge question mark. And if this passing game isn't necessarily clicking on all cylinders, are they a top 10 team? They have a tough schedule too. I mean, you got a lot of really good teams on that schedule that you're going to have to deal with if you're Florida State. You know you're going to get everyone's best shot too, based on how things went last year. So those are a couple teams that I'm looking at. Team 9, Michigan. Team 10, Florida State. Is if things don't fall into place, will they be as good at the end of the year as they're perceived to be here in the preseason? Then, no G5 teams in the AP preseason poll. They got it right, guys. With where these G5 programs are at right now, it's not taking anything away from them, but with realignment and the best, most reliable G5 teams have now really shuffled up into the Power 5. Cincy, UCF, Houston, SMU, BYU. These are some of the most reliable G5 teams. Well, they're now in the P5. And then you have the Boise States of the world, which I think Boise is still going to be a really good football team. We're going to find out week 2 when they play Oregon. Right now, they're kind of in see it to believe it mode. I cannot feel confident enough based on the way the portal has worked out for a lot of teams to tell you right now Boise belongs in the top 25. Now, they'd be probably the highest on the list. Them and Memphis would be the highest on the list. Liberty, perhaps, but Liberty lost some key pieces as well. You look at those 3, maybe 4 teams. If you want to add a Tulane, you want to add some others. But right now, we're still kind of all wondering, what are things looking like for the G5 as we progress? So I think it's appropriate at this point to not have any G5 teams in the top 25. Big weekend this past weekend for a lot of teams. A lot of teams out there scrimmaging. They're 10 practices in or so here on the 12th of August. Some are 8, some are 15, 16. If you're playing week 0, you're a little ahead naturally. But ton of buzz circulating right now. So I figured we'd just go through and just kind of give you some things that we're hearing right now. Okay, we'll start with Ohio State. They're our number 1 ranked team, so we'll start at the top. It's sounding like the offense is starting to hit its stride a little bit. All right. It's also sounding like, and we know how this offense goes. This offense is going to go how the quarterback goes. Okay. So they're going to put a lot on Will Howard's shoulders. And it's sounding more and more after the spring was very much up and down, bit of a roller coaster in the spring. It sounded like he's kind of settled into the offense and has started to figure out, all right, this is where I need to go when my feet talk to me and I'm getting through my progression. This is where I need to be looking. You can tell he's starting to get a little more comfortable. He also is kind of demonstrated that he can move, he can run, and has been able to avoid the rush. And we know, and we'll get to their defense in a moment, but it's looking like if they wanted to today, they could name Will Howard the starting quarterback. He's already getting endorsements from wide receivers. He's already getting an endorsement from Chip Kelly, from Ryan Day. They're not all saying, well, he needs to be the starter or anything like that. But when you start having defensive backs, All-American defensive backs coming out and putting their name in quotation saying, hey, this guy's playing his tail off, you know things are going pretty good. Quote from Denzel Burke this past Friday, Will Howard's been gaming, end quote. That's all I need to hear. When opposing players that I've been going against all camp are now singing my praises, he must be doing pretty well. So Will Howard closing in on being named the starter here in 24 for the Buckeyes. But the defense, look, we know the defense is going to be a really good group, okay? Based on what we've heard, it sounds like they've been dominating at times. And the defensive line in particular. The defensive line in particular have been really tough to block. I've heard that, by the way, about 6 or 7 different names too. Whether it's Tuamoloau, Sawyer, I've heard Tyleik Williams has been somewhat unblockable from time to time. I've heard Ty Hamilton has been a handful as he's starting to fill in. I've heard a lot of positive news about what's going on defensively. Now, that's a bit concerning. I know the defense is going to be good. We've seen that before. The one thing we've been concerned about in and of our own right for Ohio State has been their offensive line. And if they're having a hard time protecting and if they're getting beat badly by their own defensive line, maybe that's an indictment on them. But look, give credit where credit is due. No reason to be concerned right now because there's no games being played today, but you already know you have some dudes on defense and it's sounding like they've been dominant at times in camp. Let's go to Penn State. Based on what we're hearing, they're still awaiting a weapon to emerge on the outside. And we know the story and the narrative of Penn State last year, that they can run the ball when their backs hit the open hole. There's plenty of opportunities for them in the run game. But if you want to load the box, you can shut them down. That's the story. They go out, they hire Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas, hoping that he would inject some creativity, hoping that he would kind of do some things to make life a little bit difficult on defenses, to maybe get receivers that are not crazy, freakishly talented superstars. Maybe they do some things with stacks and bunches and motions and shifts to create favorable matchups. That's probably not going to come to fruition in training camp. You're not trying to out-scheme your own defense. They might want to consider it, considering how good their defense is. And it just sounds right now their defense is just completely dominating camp up to this point. It's still early, but you would like to see the offense maybe coming along a little bit more. And the things that you were concerned about, the fact that there's still concerns, that's something that I'm a little worried about. if I'm just going to be completely honest. This team has playoff aspirations. They have national championship aspirations. If they can't manufacture big plays on the outside, that's going to be a huge problem for them, especially when playing against the likes of Ohio State and some of the teams they'll see when they get into the 12-team playoffs. So please, someone emerge outside of the running back and tight end room for Penn State. That would be awesome. Let's go next to Nebraska. Hearing that there are some turnover concerns. There were some turnovers last weekend by the young quarterbacks. And Matt Rule basically came out and said, hey, we can't let one mistake impact our future decision-making. And it sounds like, based on what I've heard, what I've read, listening to Matt Rule, reading between the lines, it sounds like you have young quarterbacks, having been in those shoes before. As a young quarterback, when I made a mistake, let's say I threw a pick in the first quarter, I'm probably going to try to make up for that interception in quarters 2, 3, and 4. The problem is when you're going against a great defense like Nebraska has, if you try to force it, if you get greedy, if you try to make it all back on one play, you're probably going to end up in a tough spot again by making another mistake. You can't let one mistake turn into 2 and 2 to turn into 4. These things have a way of compounding themselves. Here's the other thing I'm hearing. Don't rule out in the preseason Heinrich Haarberg on being the starter early in the year. He's a veteran. He, granted, doesn't have the upside of some of the other guys. That's to be expected. But what killed this team last year? That was turnovers. 31 turnovers. Young players are probably more prone to turning the football over. So they just can't beat themselves. This Nebraska team has beaten themselves how many times in the last 5 years? So if we don't see better decision-making from the young quarterbacks, much to the chagrin of the fan base, you might see the veteran Heinrich Haarberg out there before Raiola is more comfortable as the season goes along. So keep an eye on that. But turnovers continue to be a bit of an issue so far in camp, from what I've heard from the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Let's go next to Iowa. Seeing a lot of buzz about the quarterback. Not great. Open practice at Kinnick last weekend. To see Brandon Sullivan thoroughly outplaying Cade McNamara is not great. Here's the other big problem. It's not like Sullivan lit it up in the open practice period. He went 10 of 21 for 76 yards and a couple drops. But it's the fact that McNamara, who's going into his 6th season, struggled so mightily, where he went just 8 of 24 for 20 yards and threw a pick that was returned to the house. That would be concerning. Quarterback has already been an issue. You're only going to be as good offensively as your quarterback. And to see Iowa still having challenges at that position is of concern. So hopefully they can iron that out. And the other thing I'd say too, look, it's one open practice. They have a ton of practices where you evaluate thousands of reps. So just because he wasn't his day doesn't mean McNamara won't be better moving forward, but it doesn't sound like things are all fitting together in the early portions of training camp the way you'd want them to be under new offensive coordinator Tim Lester. USC. I'm hearing so much buzz about these wide receivers. I mean, I am hearing so many positive reviews, and we understand what was lost off last year's team. Really good players, quality pieces. I keep hearing 4 sophomores at wide receiver that can go with anybody. We already know who Zachariah Branch is. I don't think I need to tell the college football world who that is. The guy's electric, okay? But the 3 names I continue to hear are Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson, and Mekhi Lemon. Now, Jacoby Lane, 6'4", has some length, couple of touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville. Deuce Robinson, 6'6", 220. Okay, he's got some big catch radius, long arms, had a 44-yard touchdown in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville. And then Mekhi Lemon, who hasn't been used as much, but I'm hearing a lot of buzz about him as well. So that's a 4-receiver quartet that's going to be a huge problem in the Big Ten. Just saying, remember those names: Lemon, Lane, Robinson, and of course, Zachariah Branch. They might have a ridiculous group of wide receivers that everyone's sleeping on. Just keep an eye on them. That's all I'm telling you. Wisconsin sounds like they found themselves a quarterback. Now, I know I've heard so far in the spring, Tyler Van Dyke, up and down, not great. But it sounds like even the first week of camp, nothing to feel great about at the moment. But in the last few days, it sounds like some special things are starting to happen. He's made some great throws to the perimeter. He's fitting them in between defenders and tight coverage over the middle. It sounds like the defense, as they're starting to ramp things up with their pressure packages, he doesn't seem bothered by any of it. He talked openly in a media period a couple weeks ago about a knee injury that really hindered his mobility last year. Sounds like things are moving in the right direction for Tyler Van Dyke and this Wisconsin offense. So that's really optimistic. Let's go to the SEC, Florida. All I'm hearing about is the running backs. I'm hearing about Jacoby Jackson, JUCO transfer. I'm hearing about Trayan Webb, who we've already known has some crazy shiftiness and might be a problem. I'm hearing about the freshman Jaden Baugh, who seems to be carrying over some of the momentum created in the spring. That's carried over through the summer, and he's going to have a place at the table. Now, with the injury to Montrell Johnson, he's been out. It's opened the door for Jacoby Jackson, for Jaden Baugh, for Trayan Webb. Like, these guys are going to be in a good spot running the football. I've heard the offensive line's gelling. I've heard the defensive backs are looking pretty good. Safety was a position of question. Sounds like both safeties, Devin Moore and Asa Turner, have shined at times this fall camp. They got to stay healthy because they're thin, but there's a lot to feel good about right now. It sounds like, hey, Florida Gators, everyone in that camp down there in Gainesville is saying, hey, we're going to be a little better than people realize. So not surprised to hear it, by the way. Georgia, sounds like the tight ends are going to be a position of massive strength. It's Georgia, right? The home of Brock Bowers. You're telling me they're going to be good at tight end? Well, I'm just, from what I've heard, Brock Bowers was incredible. This will not diminish whatsoever how good Brock Bowers will be, past and future. The guy's insane. Like, one of the best pound-for-pound football players I've ever covered. But I continue to hear the name Ben Urasek, who's going to play a huge role this year. I'm beginning to hear more and more the name that we were talking about last year as the complementary piece to Brock Bowers. We knew Oscar Delp would be there. Oscar Delp's going to be rock solid as well. But we had heard the name Lawson Lucky as, hey, don't sleep on this kid, Lawson Lucky. Well, there's a ton of people that were excited about him, and then he had the high ankle sprain. It sounds like he's had another great offseason. It sounds like Oscar Delp's continued to get more comfortable, and Ben Urasek has a chance to be a star. So Georgia, the rich get richer. They might have 3 possible difference-making tight ends. So that's something to keep in mind. Sounds also like the defense has been really good so far, which is encouraging considering how many guys have been on the lineup. I mean, Warren Brinson's missed some time. Chaz Chambliss has missed some time. CJ Allen has missed some time. So they've been kind of without a lot of their guys in the middle to early part of fall camp. But as those guys start to get healthy, and the defense already looks pretty good, that is only going to make the strong stronger. So that's something worth noting. Texas. Everybody's been talking all offseason about their defensive tackles. I've been talking about them. You've been talking about them. Experts that follow the sport really closely have been talking about them. How do you replace Tavondre Sweat, the Outland Trophy winner, and Byron Murphy? Well, you just probably can't do it with 2 guys. It's not going to happen. To find 2 guys that are that gifted to fill those voids independent of each other, not going to happen. But what you can do is create ridiculously competitive depth. Well, good news. Texas right now along the defensive line, at defensive tackle in particular, 7 guys that are currently in the rotation. You heard that right. 7 guys at defensive tackle. Most elite teams have 4, maybe 5. Like, that's elite. For Texas to have 7 currently in the rotation up front goes to show you that that is ridiculous depth. And these guys only have to play 15, 20 snaps a game, maybe 30 snaps a game at most. Think about how much they're going to be able to continually give great effort in quarter 1, quarter 4, game 3, game 8, game 17. So the depth emerging at that position is huge. We knew that Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton were going to be pretty good, but you continue to hear the name Aaron Bryant. You hear the name Alex January. You hear about the transfers from Arizona and Bill Norton and Tia Savea. You hear Lole's name from Louisville. I mean, when you hear 7 guys, that's legit. Good for Texas being able to fill what was a question mark coming into the offseason. Wide receiver, that's another group that has turned over drastically from last year. There's been a lot of inconsistencies from what I gather catching the football. Bunch of drops, uncharacteristic drops. So that's something they can hopefully get cleaned up as they move forward in fall camp. Let's go next to LSU. Don't shoot the messenger here. The defense, from what we gather, is starting to show signs of life. Okay. There's a group that allegedly is playing more free. There's a group that is playing with great aggressiveness. They've been super inconsistent, but they also have had some pretty good moments as well. Now, they've gotten gashed right at the middle a couple times. They've given up way too many plays downfield in the passing game. But you also have to take into account who they're going against. It's a great offense they're having to face. I mean, a really, really good offense. Sounds like the secondary, though, is starting to come together, and the name that I continue to hear is Ashton Stamps, who has been one of the bright spots in camp so far. So keep an eye on that name, Ashton Stamps. He might lock down one of those corner spots, and if he does, that'd be really beneficial to the back end of that defense. Texas A&M, Reuben Owens was lost for the season after a lower body injury in the scrimmage on Saturday, which is disappointing because this is a thin group already. They had 4 scholarship players. Now they're down to 3. They have Stanford transfer EJ Smith, who is Emmitt Smith's son, and he has spent the last 4 years with Stanford, but he's had a tough time kind of remaining healthy. He's missed 24 games out of 42 in his career. So he has had a tough time staying healthy, but here's hoping that he can build on last year, because last year he was able to play more than 7 games in the season for the first time in his career, hoping that he now is acclimated to the punishing blows that you're going to take as a college running back, and he'll be equipped to handle that role that he's going to have in kind of taking some of the pressure off Daniels and Le'Veon Moss. So we'll see where things go, but losing Reuben Owens is a big blow for A&M, and I hate that. Hope he can come back and be at 100%. Let's go next to Auburn. I continue to hear a ton of stuff about Cam Coleman and Keandre Lambert-Smith. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith has missed a little time here in the preseason, and we already know what they have with Rivaldo Fairweather at wide receiver. But the names I'm hearing right now are Bryce Cain, Malcolm Simmons, and Perry Thompson. Okay, those are all super talented guys that are likely going to be in position to make some big plays. Now, Malcolm Simmons, crazy top-end speed. I mean, he can just take off, and it feels like he's out of there. Bryce Cain, crazy reliable. And then Perry Thompson has a chance down the road to become a legit game breaker. If he's in there alongside Cam Coleman, they're going to be in a great spot. So it's sounding like the wide receiver core, they might even have some young guys that we didn't anticipate having a huge role this year. They're carving out a little role for themselves already. And the defensive line, sounds like the defensive line is really playing great. 8 or 9 different defensive linemen that have been in the first group. So they have established some depth at that position, and that has to be really, really encouraging. Let's go next to Oklahoma. By all accounts, the defense is dominating. All right. And that's a huge problem. Not necessarily because I think their defense is really good. Their defense is really good, and I'm not at all concerned about the possibility of that group being rock solid. They give just one play in the scrimmage that went over 20 yards, and that was a long run by a walk-on. They allowed just 1 touchdown on their Friday night scrimmage. The concern for me, though, is that Jackson Arnold has continued to kind of turn the football over. Turned it over 3 times on Friday, including a pick 6 to Danny Stutzman. But he turned it over 3 times in the bowl game as well. There were some turnover issues in the spring as well. You become a turnover guy, it's hard to kind of coach yourself out of that. And you look at some of the teams last year, whether it was Nebraska, whether it was Miami, whether it was Clemson. When you start turning the football over with crazy regularity, the likelihood of your team being consistent goes down drastically. So they got to figure out a way to make Jackson Arnold comfortable and not force the ball and make mistakes by turning the football over. Because I think OU's path to success exists, but you can't be giving that defense the short field over and over and over again. That defense is too good to be put in a position where the offense is already in field goal range before they even take a snap. So hopefully things can get ironed out for Oklahoma with their turnover. Let's go next to Tennessee. The thing that I keep hearing about all offseason for Tennessee is they're going to go as Nico Iamaleava is going to go, which, by the way, might still be 100% true. Now, it's hard to get a gauge where they are right now offensively. They're without 3 offensive linemen. Dylan Sampson's been dealing with a minor knee injury and hasn't scrimmaged. They've also been without some of their top receivers, whether it's Brew McCoy, Dante Thornton. They've had, I think, Mike Matthews, the freshman's been out. Braylon Staley's been out. They've had a ton of guys that have been in and out of the lineup offensively, so there hasn't been a ton of continuity there. But we continue to forget that this defense has a chance to be one of the best in the league. I mean, their defensive line might be the best in the SEC. And the one question mark for Tennessee has been the secondary. And I continue to hear Jermon McCoy mentioned, the Oregon State transfer, as one of the standouts in camp so far. So you now have a standout at one of the positions that was a significant question. They're moving in the right direction. Like, I'm feeling better about the preseason predictions about where Tennessee might ultimately be. And it might not be because of the offense. It might be because of the defense early on that can really get after the quarterback and create a lot of issues for the opposing offense, and them kind of carrying the water until that offense is ready to take flight. And that might take a week or two. Let's go next to Miami in the ACC. A couple more here. Miami, we've talked so much about Cam Ward and what he's going to bring to the position, how he's going to steady the position, the way he can run, his good decision making that he displayed at Washington State the last couple of years, how he makes everybody better by creating and allowing guys to uncover and scramble drill. We know Cam Ward's going to be amazing, but do not sleep on Damian Martinez. Okay, the guy ran for almost 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns in 12 games at Oregon State just last year. And by all accounts, he is the physical bell cow back that Miami desperately needed. Think about the running back rotation last year, how many guys were in and out of the lineup. They had quality pieces, but they didn't have a super reliable guy. Damian Martinez is that guy. So while everyone's going to focus on the addition of Cam Ward, we will too. He's a great player. I think he'll make an instant impact. Do not sleep on Damian Martinez. Heard nothing but rave reviews about him in camp so far. Let's go next to Clemson. I've heard some real positives about their offense. A lot of positives about their offense. We've talked a lot. Can Cade Klubnik take that next step? Will Garrett Riley's group be able to grow in year number 2 with him as the offensive coordinator? I've heard they're really bullish on what they've seen from their wide receiver position. Sounds like their offense is looking exactly the way they need to look. Here's the problem. I've heard there's been a ton of inconsistency along the defensive line. Now, supposedly, they've had guys jumping off sides. They've had a defensive line that's getting pushed around quite a bit by the offensive line. That's not something I expected. One thing that I have not done a crazy deep dive on this year is Clemson's defensive line, because I think back to last year, think about how many guys were returning and how many guys have a chance to potentially make huge second-year leaps, like a TJ Parker, like a Peter Woods. Sounds like the defensive line still has a lot of room to grow. And you have Georgia week 1. If that defensive line isn't ready to handle the physical presence that is the Georgia offensive line, then look out. I know they're relatively thin at defensive end, but this defensive line needs to take a big, big leap here in the next couple weeks, because they have a huge test coming up in week 1. I've also heard there's been a couple of muff punts in camp as well. So either way, Clemson offense, right where they need to be. Defense, still room for improvement. But the good news is, when was the last time Clemson had issues on defense? Seriously. It's been a while. They're going to be good on defense. I'm not worried about that. Just seems like that defensive front 7, maybe there's a little bit more room to grow, and they need to grow a little faster as that first game approaches. And then Notre Dame, finally. We talked last week about Charles Jagasaw, who is out for the year. He was the projected starting left tackle. It sounds like they've kind of settled in right now. We told you it'd likely be Tosh Baker at left tackle. That's who it is at the moment. Pat Coogan will be at left guard. Ashton Craig will be there at center. Billy Schrouth will be there at right guard. And then on the right side, Emil Wagner, who will round out that offensive line. Rocco Spindler continues to battle at that left guard spot alongside Pat Coogan, but that's kind of where they're at right now. So just want to give you a slight update with what was going on there with Jagasaw's loss. It's officially official. Tosh Baker's going to get the first crack at that left tackle spot. Hey, thanks for being with us. It's awesome to be with you guys. Always College Football would not be where we're at as far as downloads, viewership, support, people growing and downloading the podcast at a record rate. We would not be at this point if not for you. Please continue to tell your friends that we are previewing the season as well, if not better than anybody. We love what we do here, but we do it for you. We love the sport. Would we do it for each other? Sure, we would. I'd do it for Mark. I'd do it for Jack. I'd do it for Jake because we love ball. But we do it for the fans, man. We love the game just like you guys love the game. So continue to check in with us. We'll have 2 more shows this week, so a lot to look forward to. And continue to tell your friends about what we're doing here at Always College Football. Like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you download your podcast. You can hit that thumbs up in the ESPN YouTube box right there, right below us. That'll be awesome. You can subscribe to the ESPN College YouTube channel. That'd be great as well. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. Remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.